cancer. He died last night at the age of 58, his family by his side. Paul McCartney pays his own tribute. He was like a baby brother to me. New advice to women about the risks of flying long distance. And changing habits 10 years in... Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC's news at 1 o'clock. The former Beatle George Harrison has lost his 5-year fight with cancer. He died last night at the age of 58 at the home of friends in Los Angeles. His wife and son were at his bedside. In a statement, the family said he left this world as he lived in it, conscious of God, fearless of death and at peace. Sir Paul McCartney led the tributes this morning, describing him as a baby brother. Our first report is from our arts correspondent, Nick Hyam.
Tributes from fans today at Abbey Road, the London recording studio forever associated with George Harrison and the Beatles.
I'd known he was sick for a while, but, never really thought it would happen. It's always tragic, when someone like him passes.
His contribution to the band is everything. I mean, he was the guitarist. He is the Beatles.
George Harrison helped supply the soundtrack for an entire generation, including the British and Irish Prime Ministers.
I mean, we grew up with the Beatles. Their music and the band, the personalities of the band were the background to our lives, and I think people will be very sad at his death.
Among the tributes today, one from Paul McCartney, friend, collaborator, fellow legend.
He's such a brave lad. To me, he's just my little baby brother. We grew up together, and I knew him in my old hometown, Liverpool. And we just had so many beautiful times together that's what I'm going to remember him by. The lovely guy who's full of humour, as I say. Even when I saw him last time and he was obviously very unwell, he was still cracking jokes like he always was. And he'll be sorely missed. He's a beautiful man, and the world will miss him.
To begin with, George was the quiet Beatle. The others loved attention. George just played his guitar, and he was modest with it.
I mean, we don't know. It may be next week, it may be 2 or 3 years, but I think we'll be in the business, either up there or down there, for at least another 4 years.
Love, love me do. You know I love you.
In the early days, he sometimes looked haunted and unhappy. He felt sidelined by Lennon and McCartney.
Love me do.
He hated Beatlemania, the hysteria provoked by the world's first supergroup. But it was George who took the group in a new direction. He introduced them to Indian culture and to meditation at the feet of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He learnt the sitar from the legendary Ravi Shankar and influenced not just the Beatles.
He was certainly the one that popularised the idea that you could actually take facets of other cultures and sort of incorporate them into Western pop. And I mean, that resonates today.
Something in the way she moves
George composed some of the later Beatles' finest songs.
attracts me like no other lover.
And when the group split in 1970, he was the first to make his mark as a solo artist. My Sweet Lord, performed at a legendary fundraising concert for Bangladesh, went to #1 on both sides of the Atlantic. In the late 70s, he financed the Monty Python team's Life of Brian when no one else would, fearing allegations of blasphemy.
You're all individuals! Yes, we're all individuals!
For a time, his company, Handmade Films, was Britain's leading film producer, and George was a regular at awards ceremonies.
Oh, the sweet smell of success, handle me with care.
With other ageing rock stars, he formed an occasional band, the Travelling Wilburys. He lived quietly in his mansion near Henley, where his 30-acre garden became a passion. He never lost a cent.
The purpose of life is to find out who am I, Why am I here? That's what we need answering.
He had this inner energy which was there even when he was quite tired or whatever, the energy. And he was a great talker, this man who was supposed to be the quiet Beatle, never stopped talking when I was there, you know, and he had one full of ideas and takes on things and strange theories and enthusiasm.
The Lonely Lad is a celebrity. Now, the burden of fame has been lifted, but the songs remain.
And they're mourning one of the city's missed sons. The flag is flying at half-mast at City Hall, and a book of condolence has been opened at the Beatles Museum. Catherine Marston is in Liverpool. Catherine.
George, this is Matthew Street, which over many years has become a virtual shrine to the Beatles, and it attracts something like 250,000 people here every single year. Today, it's been attracting people who want to pay their respects to George Harrison. And the reason is this, the Cavern Club. This is where it is, and George Harrison's. Staff here today have opened their own book of condolence for people to sign. Like so many people across this city feel that George Harrison wasn't just a man of unique talent, but also someone that people here felt was a very real local lad. They come bearing small floral tributes and cards. Many people in Liverpool have felt compelled to pay their respects at George Harrison's statue.
Pretty upset, to be honest. Although I knew about a week ago that it was possible that he could die in the next 2 weeks, I wasn't really quite prepared for that to happen today.
Oh, I'm devastated, I really am. I mean, although it was partly expected, I suppose, the battle against cancer, but it's very tragic. He was a brilliant guitarist and such an inspiration.
This is a city in mourning. People here are passionate about the Beatles, and the council leader was the first to sign a book of condolence opened at the town hall. It will be one small way to express the feelings of sadness felt by so many. Billy Kinsley was on the bill at the Cavern Club in 1963. It was the Beatles' last gig here.
Well, George was very laid back. He'd be very, very quiet, and then he'd come out with an astonishing quote. Very, very funny guy. It's like, I suppose, what Paul and Ringo said, it's like losing a brother. To me, it's probably like losing a cousin, something like that.
Beatlemania continues to draw thousands of visitors to Liverpool each year. The Fab Four have never cult status here. The world has lost a very talented musician. Liverpool has lost one of its greatest ambassadors. The City Council will lead the official mourning here in the city. There will be some kind of memorial service eventually planned to celebrate the life of George Harrison. The city's mayor has described him as a real Scouser who never forgot his roots. George.
Catherine, thank you. They're in mourning too. Were the first British band to hit the big time. George Harrison died in Los Angeles, and this morning Americans are waking up to the news. Our correspondent David Willis reports from New York.
George Harrison died at the Los Angeles home of one of his oldest friends, Gavin DeBecker. His wife and son were by his side. In a statement, the family said that George Harrison left this world as he lived in it, conscious of God, fearless of death, and at peace.
Died at 4:30 Eastern Time, but we didn't...
News of his death is lead story on America's morning shows. The Beatles performed their biggest concerts in the United States, and the group and George Harrison have remained hugely popular.
That's very sad. Very sad. He's, you know, part of our history, obviously.
His smile. That's really, he had a beautiful smile.
The Beatles! Whether it was his work with the Beatles or studying the sitar with Ravi Shankar, George Harrison inspired a generation of musicians here in America.
That had a big effect on me. I was growing up in Baltimore at the time, and I went out to see Ravi Shankar when he came to town. And I know I wouldn't have if it wasn't for George Harrison and the Beatles being involved.
Since early this morning, fans have been laying flowers at Fields Memorial here in New York's Central Park, created in memory of fellow Beatle John Lennon, who was assassinated nearby.